The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Over the weekend, journalist Seymour Hersh released a very different story about the killing of Osama bin Laden than that which we were told by the U.S. government. And this alleges basically three different things, and I will tell you what they are. These are Seymour Hersh's allegations about the killing of Osama bin Laden. Number one, Hersh says that bin Laden was not actually hiding in Abbottabad, as we have been told, but rather that he was on house arrest, placed there under guard by Pakistan's security services with financial help from the Saudis. Number two, Hersh says we didn't track down where Osama bin Laden was through diligent intelligence work, as the government would have you think, but rather that a Pakistani informant actually ratted out Osama bin Laden to the CIA in exchange for a $25 million reward. And number three, Hersh says we did not kill Osama bin Laden in a firefight, but rather that he was abandoned by his Pakistani guards and gunned down in cold blood by American troops. The entire thing was supposed to remain secret, but you might remember that there was a helicopter crash during this operation to take out Osama bin Laden, and Hersh says it was because of that helicopter crash that this entire two different stories thing even started, and that if it weren't for that, that it would just have been one story on message, no reason to think anything was amiss. The White House denied the claims made by Seymour Hersh. Okay, no surprise so far. But here's where it gets interesting. Numerous reporters, including reporters from the New York Times, as well as from NBC rather, have said actually parts of what Seymour Hersh is saying we also agree with, and we were researching at the time as well. For example, blogger R.J. Hillhouse published similar allegations 4 years ago in 2011, and is now saying not only is Seymour Hersh right about some of this stuff, Seymour Hersh copied this stuff from us, that I was RJ saying that they were publishing the exact same stuff at the time. Carlotta Gall, a New York Times correspondent based in Afghanistan, writes in the Times that she also encountered evidence to support one of the claims made by Hersh, which is that Pakistan had been hiding bin Laden in Abbottabad all along. Over at NBC, a group of reporters say that three high-level sources confirmed the same claim with regard to the whereabouts of Osama bin Laden. And one reporter has already stated that they saw the compound right after everything happened and that it was riddled with bullet holes. So while they don't disagree with everything that Hersh has said, it would certainly bring up questions about, well, if this was not actually a firefight, if Osama bin Laden was gunned down in cold blood, why would there be all of these bullet holes elsewhere? Unless, Lewis, I guess it was part of creating a scene that made it look like a firefight. So question one, before you address, Lewis, whether you believe the claims, does it matter, based on the two stories we now have, Seymour Hersh's story and the official story from the U.S. government, does it make a difference if Hersh's story is true?
Well, only in that our government would have put on, the White House would have put on this elaborate lie to make it seem like they achieved this through hard work and determination and did something that didn't happen. Okay, so is it that big a deal? No, I guess not. I don't think it would make a huge difference.
Well, the argument that's being made is, okay, if Osama bin Laden really was killed and that is the location where he was killed, why do the details matter? But the counterpoint to that is, hold on a second, the government lying about the arguably biggest event in what was then a decade-long war on terror following 9/11, that is a huge deal. The entire 10-year lead-up to the killing of Osama bin Laden was all about capturing and or killing the individual responsible for the 9/11 attacks. And after a decade, it happens, and we're not told the real story. In that context, it's quite a big deal.
Well, in a way, we still killed him. My question would be, how long, a bigger question for me would be, did we know that he was in Pakistan before? Did we not take action? Did we know where he was at any point and not take action? lying about how it happened, we still did it. So it just doesn't surprise me. I'm not shocked by this, and I don't think it's a huge deal.
Okay, now you've looked at the claims that Seymour Hersh has made. Do these claims, now that we have corroboration, as it may be, from the New York Times reporter and from NBC, what is your thinking about the truth of these claims?
I think they could very well be true. I don't really know what to believe yet, but I assume that this is going to explode and that we are going to start hearing from a lot of different people, and there will be many investigations. So
Maybe.
I think we'll have to wait and see.
I think that there may be a sort of that they may try to just sweep this under the rug. The administration, they've denied it, and it may not get too much oxygen, but we will see. I am interested to see what ultimately happens. And if we do at some point have sort of incontrovertible proof or an admission that it is, as Seymour Hersh says, there are a lot of people who have been slamming Hersh for years who are going to have to issue some kind of explanation here.
Yeah, I think so. There's going to be a lot of explaining, and we'll see if anyone's up to that challenge, up to doing it.
We've talked about TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, a lot, and incredibly, too many Americans still have no idea about this thing that's going on. And I call it a thing because some want to call it a trade deal. I don't think that that's the right way to describe it. It is not really a trade deal. It is more of a corporate power deal. It would give big corporations stronger copyright protection and intellectual property protection. It would give big corporations more free rein on damaging the environment, and lax environmental guidelines would govern the activities of these multinational, transnational corporations. We only even know some pieces of what's in this thing because it's for the most part being negotiated behind closed doors and in secret. We do have some good news, though. Democrats have at least stopped the fast tracking of TPP, which is a really big element here. Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid handed a big win to the opponents of TPP by getting Senate Democrats to block fast-track trade authority from moving forward. The final vote was 52 to 45 in the Senate, with all Democrats voting no. Senator Sherrod Brown, a Democrat, announced that he was opposing moving the bill forward because the package that Mitch McConnell had brought to the floor contained only 2 of the 4 trade bills and did not contain a level playing field for American workers. That's an understatement, if I've ever heard one. Yes, this is the furthest from a level playing field for American workers that I could imagine. Senator Bernie Sanders, during the debate, ran down a long list of bogus claims made by supporters of free trade in the past. This is a big setback for John Boehner, for Mitch McConnell, and for President Obama as well, all of whom wanted to see this go forward. It is expected to pass the Senate eventually. It's not clear whether they're going to have the votes in the House, Lewis. Is this a big victory or a small victory?
I think this is a small victory. It's not, winning the battle, but it looks like we're going to lose the war. Unfortunately, this is just there's just too much force behind this, too much momentum.
Well, the one good thing about this is it now delays it basically creates a month wait period before moving forward on the bill. So now is the time to take action. Now is the time to call your representatives. Go to whoismyrepresentative.com, right? You put in your zip code and it'll tell you these are your senators, this is your member of Congress, these are their contact details. And now is the time to say there was just this waiting period that we've been granted based on the Senate vote by Democrats. What can we do? What can you do as my elected official to stop this from moving forward? There is an opportunity here, Lewis, and I understand the disproportionate power of big corporations and lobbyists. I totally get it. But we have a month now, and if everybody calls their elected officials, this could be heard.
It could be, but you know me. I would imagine that even if every senator heard from 50% of their constituents about this, and all of whom were saying no, I still don't think it would make a difference.
A couple of other notes on this. Supporters of TPP have now taken to arguing that we need TPP to push back against China's increased power. It is such a farcical assertion because the same people, the same organizations backing TPP are the multinational corporations and bankers that got rich transferring the American technology, jobs, and capital that allowed China to build up in the first place. So it seems with every setback, there's a new set of talking points from the proponents of TPP, each less believable than the prior.
They've got their talking points, and they will continue to. They're prepared for what we are going to throw at them. No doubt about it.
A new report in The Guardian says that the food industry has now reached the World Health Organization and successfully infiltrated and corrupted it. We've talked, Lewis, about our skepticism of the FDA. We've talked about our skepticism of other groups that we feel, and I think evidence supports, have been reached, have been affected by moneyed interests. And The Guardian says that the World Health Organization, the WHO, is now one of those organizations. Just as the tobacco industry did, they believe, The Guardian reports, that the WHO has been compromised. A few talking points on this. They say food companies regularly attempt to place scientists favorable to their views on the WHO committees, that they financially support non-governmental organizations which were invited to formal discussions on issues by UN agencies, that the big food industry is financing research and policy groups that support their views, which are then used by the World Health Organization to make policy position papers, and that the food industry has financed individuals who would promote an anti-regulation ideology to the public, for example, through op-eds in newspaper articles around the world. According to Norbert Hirschhorn, who is a Connecticut-based public health academic, quote, "The easy movement of experts, toxicologists in particular, between private firms, universities, tobacco and food industries, and international agencies creates the conditions for conflict of interest." What's the average person to do? I mean, increasingly, we somewhat trust the FDA when it comes to approving medications, but at the same time, when we see the number of medications that have been approved that have done serious health damage to so many people, we're right to be skeptical. When it comes to unregulated terms like natural and so many others that the FDA does not even have any jurisdiction over, we can't totally trust what we see out there because of the impact that corporations have had on the FDA. It appears that it's the same thing with the WHO. How do you determine what's healthy, what's okay to eat?
It's very difficult. I think in a lot of cases, when you are at the store and you are looking over whatever they have, in many cases, it may be impossible to determine what is healthy. There are still things, like GMOs, things we just still don't know anything about that could be affecting us in an adverse way. So I don't know. What does the average person do when we have so little information?
Yeah,
there's so much false information.
It is tough. And, as we've talked about on GMOs, we don't even have any actual evidence that says GMOs are harmful, but there's a huge focus on that. And then people say, well, it hasn't been studied, but the reality is it actually has been studied, but GMOs are being mixed in with pesticides. And then that we do know is actually harmful to individuals, and people get confused. So there's kind of two elements. There's the corruption of the agencies that we should be able to trust in to give us information about what is and is not healthy. And then there's just confusion because of conflation and corporate media reports around a lot of these issues. I don't have an answer. If you're just an average person who has a little bit of time maybe to devote to researching this type of thing, but you can't devote your life to it, you have a life to live, how do you know? What do you do? And we've talked about it so many times. Fish is healthy. Fish is not healthy unless it's from cold water and not farm raised. We could take any food item, we could take any group of medications, and we could find directly contradictory studies and reports.
So what is the healthiest thing to do? Raise your own animals and grow your own food. We most of us don't have that liberty, so it's tough.
It is very, very tough, and not good news regarding the WHO. If you have thoughts on this, you can tweet us, twitter.com/David Pakman Show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Our program is funded directly by the audience. If you enjoy our show and want to support the work we're doing, become a member. Go to davidpakman.com/membership and sign up. And we do an entire additional show called The Bonus Show just for our subscribers. Every day there is an extra show just for our members. So go to davidpakman.com/membership to join today's new member of the day, Martin Golnick. Martin, thank you for being a David Pakman Show member. Voting with your dollars, we depend on members like you. It's time for Hatriot Mail with a brand new Hatriot Mail introduction. Very exciting.
Because the government that is supposedly totally inept is the same government that can pull off a conspiracy that'll blow your mind. Hatriot Mail. Written by patriots who hate David Pakman. Because America. And because freedom.
All right, this week's Hatriot Mail needs no particular introduction. Let's just listen and take it in together.
Gee, I wonder if David will discuss how poor, innocent, unarmed black child Freddie Gray, the fence, was a career criminal that any law-abiding citizen should be glad is off our streets. Gee, I wonder if David will ever talk about how the Trayvon Martin and Mike Brown stories fell apart. David, you make Fox News look fair and balanced. Congratulations on being a paid distractor. You have zero credibility.
Well, I think we know what my favorite word from that one is, Lewis. Of course, I believe our show does have credibility, but we seem to lack creditably, which is not something I'm very, very familiar with. Apparently, it's connected to Trayvon Martin and Michael Brown in some way.
Yeah, I think perhaps it's in another language, but yeah. You need to know, David, that anyone who has a criminal record deserves to die. I think that's the point here.
Yes, that's the main point, which is that should be the key focus. Anytime anyone is killed by police, if they've ever done anything that is against the law, they deserve to be executed summarily by police. Let's talk about lies relating to gay marriage. This is so interesting. Last week, lawmakers from the Texas Senate Committee heard testimony on SB 2065. It's a bill designed to shield members of the clergy and churches from performing same-sex weddings. We've talked about the new front on the bigoted war against same-sex marriage or against gay rights is religious freedom. It seems that we are going in the direction of legal same-sex marriage. So those who are religious are trying to fight having to be in any way involved in it, be it through their church or clergy, or even in terms of providing business services or products to LGBT individuals based on religious freedom. So Beverly Roberts shows up. She's the area director for Concerned Women for America. And she gives testimony where she talks about gay people who are trying to force clergy to perform gay marriages. This is what Beverly Roberts had to say. Take a look.
I have a question for you. Is it necessary for a couple to be married by a minister to be legally married? If not, why are homosexual couples in states where same-sex marriage is legal demanding that ministers perform their marriage ceremonies? Should we not consider these to be hate crimes? Are these not instances of targeted bigotry? Are these couples not engaging in the same bullying tactics they profess to deplore? Why are they attacking a minister when they don't even need him to perform their marriage? So again, I ask you, who are the bullies, the bigots, and the haters?
Sounds kind of weird, right? And it sounded kind of weird to our friend David Badash over at the New Civil Rights Movement as well. So David reached out to Beverly Roberts via email and said, hey, can you tell us about, I don't know, just one or a few of those stories where there are gay people trying to mandate or force clergy to do same-sex marriages? Roberts wrote back and basically admitted that the entire thing was false, saying, quote, my testimony did not relate to a specific instance. That's what's called a lie, Beverly. If you give testimony about events that have taken place, and it turns out that the testimony did not actually relate to any events that had taken place. That's what we call lying. And as I feel like it's talking to a little kid, do you know the difference between something that's the truth and something that's a lie? You know, sometimes police will say that to kids when they're talking to children about something they may have witnessed. Do you know what a lie is? I feel like we need to be asking the same thing to these bigots.
Maybe she didn't realize that this was a lie. Perhaps she was confusing details from different stories, or maybe just she's really afraid that this is something that could happen and was trying to warn us about it. But I'm not convinced that she even realized she was lying. This
is really, really great work by David Badash over at the New Civil Rights Movement. And I think that behind the scenes, certainly many of these bigots would say, while I'm opposed to lying in principle because of Jesus and stuff, here I'm serving the greater good by lying, because it's even worse if we have gay marriage and in churches and whatnot. So the lie is somehow okay. This sort of moral relativism that they create with regard to their religion is pretty stunning. Really great work by the New Civil Rights Movement. Also really great work by Lauren Windsor from The Undercurrent. Marsha Blackburn at a press conference the other day, she's a congresswoman from Tennessee, Republican of course. She said that Christians are being persecuted in the United States. Lauren Windsor did the absolute correct thing, which is, give me one bit of evidence to support your claim. Give me one example of Christians being persecuted in this country. And here's what happened. Here's what Marsha Blackburn responded with.
Do you feel that Christians are being persecuted in this country?
I think that we've got some issues where religious freedom is certainly up for debate and discussion, and we want to make certain that individuals have the right to continue to worship and to exercise their religious beliefs.
Can you be specific about the instances in which you feel that Christians are being persecuted?
You know, there have been several lately. I can't give you a specific right off the cuff. I'm sorry.
Don't you think that if it's so egregious, if the discrimination against Christians is so egregious, if it's so important to Marsha Blackburn to fight against this discrimination against Christians, that she would have just one example, even if it's a completely out of context and trumped up example that we later find out to be a lie, you would think that she would at least have one example to give of this horrible Christian persecution that's going on. But no, not even a single one.
You would think so. And when I heard her talking about this before she answered that question in the first part of the clip, I was thinking to myself, oh yeah, okay, she's talking about the pizza place and she's talking about the bakers.
Right.
And so I know what she's talking about. And then she says, I don't have a specific example. Was she afraid to mention those, or is she talking about something else?
I think what we can say is that Marsha Blackburn is desperately trying to fill the void that was created with the departure of Michelle Bachmann.
That could be it. Yes. Those are some big shoes to fill, though. She has a long way to go.
In your mind, Lewis, what would be an example of anti-Christian persecution? Like if you could just say, here is what would get me to say, yes, this is anti-Christian persecution. What would it look like?
I suppose it would look like people in a town trying to kick Christians out of their town, maybe trying to take down their church, at the nonviolent level, something like that. Of course, if you get into the violent stuff, that's easy.
So, for example, Christmas being a federal holiday and Christianity being the only religion that has a federal holiday in the U.S., that doesn't check off boxes to you or set off alarms that they're being persecuted.
Persecution? No, I don't think so.
All right, fair enough. Next, we will talk to constitutional law professor Adam Winkler. What can we expect from the Supreme Court's June decision on same-sex marriage ban?
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Adam Winkler is a professor of constitutional law at the UCLA School of Law and also author of the book Gunfight, The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America. Adam, we've been covering what were the oral arguments at the Supreme Court with regard to what may lead to some type of ruling or commentary about state bans on same-sex marriage from the Supreme Court. Let's start at the broadest point and kind of narrow our focus. What's the broad range of what the Supreme Court could say about same-sex marriage bans?
Well, there's a few obvious possibilities. I mean, the first possibility is that the Supreme Court could say there is no right to same-sex marriage. I think that would be a very troubling decision, in part because the Supreme Court in September of last year allowed over 20 states to follow court orders that required them to allow same-sex marriage because of constitutional rulings against the bans. It doesn't make any sense for the Supreme Court to allow people to get married in all of those states just to change its mind 9 months later and throw all of those marriages into substantial doubt. Another obvious possibility is that the Supreme Court could go the other way and rule that there is a constitutional right to same-sex marriage in all 50 states. This would undoubtedly lead to some objections by some states, but seems to be the ruling that most court watchers expect out of this Supreme Court. And then a third possibility is, of course, that the Supreme Court could rule that there is no right to same-sex marriage, but that states are constitutionally required to recognize marriages performed in other states. That would create a pretty big loophole and perhaps lead to an era of real marriage tourism as states make their laws easier for people to come just on a weekend visit to come get married.
And if that were to happen, would we see any kind of argument, or would you expect to see any kind of argument based on the idea that, well, hold on a second, do states' rights trump the federal law, which is something that we've heard from particularly conservatives when it comes to, we saw it with the Clive and Bundy situation in Nevada. We've seen it asserted a number of times that it doesn't even matter what federal law is. We are supposed to we are able to override that at the state level. Would you expect to hear that argument?
Well, I think we're already seeing some signs of that. We saw before the Supreme Court even heard oral argument in the case, Roy Moore, the chief judge of the Alabama Supreme Court, held that the state's judges were not supposed to follow a federal court order requiring them to perform same-sex marriages. And I believe that Texas is just proposing a bill that would ban the local governments from using state funds to perform or sanction any same-sex marriage. There's no doubt there's going to be some kind of backlash to the Supreme Court's ruling on same-sex marriage. I don't know if it would be the kind of backlash that evokes Roe versus Wade, and there's really some skepticism, especially among scholars now, about whether Roe versus Wade really caused such a backlash. But in any case, it's clear there's going to be some states that are going to fight a ruling in favor of same-sex marriage every step of the way.
So now you've brought up another interesting possibility, which is the idea of not funding or not allowing state funds to be used for. We've been talking a lot about, as we see more and more states legalize same-sex marriage, the fight from the anti-gay crowd has moved into so-called religious freedom, which is fine. The state may have decided that they can get married, but our religious freedom allows us to not serve them in our business, for example. And I was anticipating that as same-sex marriage goes forward, state after state after state, the religious freedom argument was going to be the one that was increasingly used. But you're bringing up another line of thought, which we've seen elsewhere. We've seen it around the Affordable Care Act, and we've seen it in other areas, which is whatever the law is at the federal level, we can avoid funding the carrying out of some elements of that law at the state level. What would be the legal implications of that? Would it be considered a violation of a federal law or Supreme Court decision merely not to fund something?
Well, it kind of depends on how the funding mechanism works. We've also seen a similar refusal to fund what is amounting to a constitutional right in the context of abortion, where the federal government and states have vigorously fought to keep state funds from being used to support abortion in any way, shape, or form. We might see something similar in the context of same-sex marriage. I don't know if it'll be as profound as that, and it really depends in terms of its overall legality and constitutionality. It's certainly clear that the federal government does not have to spend its money to support people getting abortions. The Supreme Court has held that. But it's not clear that states could refuse to fund basic marital services, such as having county clerks sign off on forms that allow same-sex couples to get married in protest, because that would effectively deny the same-sex couples the right to get married. And by completely denying a constitutional right, the state law would run afoul of the Constitution.
In reading some of the reports of the oral arguments that took place, there was a lot of discussion around Justice Kennedy asking some pretty pointed devil's advocate type questions. And some of the analyses I read said, don't misread that as him being against same-sex marriage, that there's a long history in the Supreme Court of all of the justices asking adversarial, devil's advocate type questions, but that's not really a good way to judge how a justice might ultimately vote. Do you tend to agree with that analysis?
Well, studies do show that justices tend to ask the more difficult questions of the side they oppose, not the side they support. So while there's certainly true that Justice Kennedy's questions, which have struck fear in the hearts of many supporters of same-sex marriage, maybe they were just devil's advocate questions. We do see Supreme Court justices occasionally asking devil's advocate questions. But I think it really ties into a larger theme about the same-sex marriage controversy in the Supreme Court. I think very many people, especially those on the same-sex marriage case, have already concluded that this case is over, that they've won this case, that same-sex marriage is going to come from the United States Supreme Court. And I guess if I were a betting man and had to bet my house one way or the other, I'd bet that the Supreme Court will rule in favor of same-sex marriage. But we should always be very cautious of being overconfident, especially when everything relies on the vote of a single person, and that's Justice Anthony Kennedy. When he comes into town, he could go any way. While he's generally been very good on gay rights, and I guess, like I say, I bet on him to be good in the end, in this case, you just never know with the Supreme Court. They've got a continual habit of surprising us, as they've done time and time again in the context of LGBT rights.
And so you do see the vote that same way. I mean, Clarence Thomas has said he believes that there are 5 votes for gay marriage, and I'm guessing that you see Kennedy as that 5th vote.
I think that's right. I mean, I think most court watchers are focused on the fact that Justice Kennedy has written the 3 major, strong pro-gay rights opinions by the Supreme Court over the last 20 years. Like I say, everyone written by Justice Kennedy. He's been a very big supporter of LGBT rights. Yet it's also worth recognizing that in all of those earlier cases, Justice Kennedy always went a little bit less far than he could have or should have in those cases. And ruled in such a way as to make those decisions more limited in their reach than they might otherwise be. And that's a little bit troubling for supporters of same-sex marriage, because you really don't know exactly what you're going to get from Justice Kennedy.
There's been this other theme that I've heard when talking about what the Supreme Court might do, or some expect it to do, which is, listen, the Supreme Court must recognize that the tide has sort of turned with regard to same-sex marriage across the country. We've seen over 30 states legalize same-sex marriage. So you'd think they would just realize this is the time to make a broad ruling. That strikes me as a little bit of a fallacious argument, in the sense that if they are merely interpreting law, wouldn't the correct decision, so to speak, the legally accurate decision as to the constitutionality of these bans, not depend on public opinion, nor on how many states have already passed same-sex marriage? Help me to understand that sort of point of view.
Well, I think there is no doubt that if there is a clear and accurate understanding of the law that goes in one direction and public opinion goes the other way, I think all 9 justices on the Supreme Court would say they need to stick with the unambiguous, clear articulation of law and not be swayed by public opinion. The difficulty here, David, is that what is the clear right answer? Is the denial of marriage right a denial of the right to marry? Is the denial of the right to marry itself a denial of the promise of equality under the Constitution? I think many people are concluding that the answer to both those questions is that there is a constitutional denial in preventing people from getting married. But it's also not crystal clear exactly how you should interpret the Constitution. And I think as a result, I don't think any of the justices will be forced to confront that question that you posed, because I don't think there's any clear, unambiguous, surefire answer to this question in terms of constitutional interpretation. As a result, the court will not look to public opinion so much, but will be considering its legacy. Look, Chief Justice Roberts, Anthony Kennedy, they know that students are going to be talking about them in 100 years' time. David, I ask you, if you knew for sure people were going to be talking about you and teaching what you do in classes all over America in 100 years, wouldn't you be a little bit attentive to what your legacy is?
I'm attentive. I'm trying to be attentive already, just because the internet is like this permanent record, you know.
Yeah, but Chief Justice John Roberts knows the history of the Supreme Court. Chief Justice Roger Taney was an illustrious judge who had a lot of very, very sound and strong rulings over 30 years leading the Supreme Court. But he's known today solely for one bad decision, and it was a bad one, and that's the Dred Scott case that held that blacks could not be citizens under the Constitution. And I think Chief Justice Roberts knows that he could do a great job as a Supreme Court justice, but if you get it wrong in the really big cases, your legacy is going to be tarnished forever. And I think that, it's easy for me. I don't have a legacy that's going to last forever. But for a guy like Chief Justice Roberts, you got to think about those issues.
All right, we're going to continue following it, and of course we'll be talking about it when this decision ultimately happens. Adam Winkler is a professor of constitutional law at the UCLA Law School. Make sure to check out his book, Gunfight, The Battle Over the Right to Bear Arms in America. Adam, always a pleasure to have you on.
Thanks for having me, David.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
There's a new survey from Pew Research Center about religion, and it shows us that Christianity is in sharp decline here in the United States. We recently talked about that nationally, based on population changes and birth rates in religious versus non-religious countries, that on the global level, we can expect to see a decline in the non-religious. But here in the US, the trend is quite different. The percentage of adults who describe themselves as Christians dropped by nearly 8 percentage points in just 7 years to 71%, according to a new survey from Pew. Quote from Alan Cooperman, Director of Religion Research at Pew, "It's remarkably widespread. The country is becoming less religious as a whole, and it's happening across the board. Simultaneously, the share of individuals who say they are not affiliated with a religion has jumped from 16% to about 23% in the same time period." 3 important takeaways from the new Pew survey. Number one, millennials are acutely more so than the broader population, growing even less affiliated with religion as they get older. Number two, there are more religiously unaffiliated Americans than Catholic Americans and mainline Protestant Christians today, 2015, in the United States. And number three, those who are unaffiliated with a religion are becoming, in and of themselves, more and more secular. Go to science fiction. What does science fiction tell us about the future of religion in, well, it could be in the United States, could be in the world? 2 different portrayals. Some science fiction portrays the world as acutely secular, that as technological advancement continues and as space travel begins to develop, we get even less religious. Other science fiction portrays the future as very religious, but in a very different way when it comes to how we define religion and what religions we discuss than what religion is seen as today. What do you think, Lewis? Are you part of the group that says as technology and knowledge develops, religion will fade? Or do you think that the current religions may go away, but there will still be a strong religious component to humans indefinitely?
I think there will always be a religious component, but I think generally we are moving towards a secular society, especially here in the United States. But what about those places where technology is, has kind of been halted, or it's being, it's being withheld from people? We're seeing that happen right now, and those are the countries that are very religious.
We do see that. And even within the United States, even though we are seeing a sort of secularization by about a 1 percentage point per year, which is kind of a lot, because that means another 15 years, we will have 15 percentage points fewer Americans still considering themselves religiously affiliated. That is a big change if it continues at the same rate. The religious in the U.S. still have a lot of power. They donate a lot of money to causes that they believe in. A lot of political fundraising is done based either directly or indirectly on religious beliefs or faith-based beliefs. So the influence of religion seems to be still very strong in spite of the secularization of America. Agree, disagree?
I agree. Yeah. I think we're in agreement there. I will say that I'm liking this trend. I think that religion is getting in the way of progress.
Very interesting news from Hawaii, where in an unprecedented move, lawmakers have decided that Hawaii will be going in the direction of 100% renewable energy for electricity generation by 2045. This is HB 623. And if the governor signs it into law, Hawaii would become the first U.S. state to attempt a total decarbonization of the power sector. This is a huge change. Right now, Hawaii's energy mix is more than 80% derived from fossil fuel. And this is just incredible. Most of the electricity generation in Hawaii comes from oil. Hawaii is in this very unique situation where, because of their physical location, they can't really import electricity. They can't really import power. They have to generate it there. And as a result, they've been using oil to generate electricity, which is so dirty and so inefficient. So not only is this an unprecedented move, Lewis, this is happening in a state that really, really needs to do this because they're using oil for electricity.
And someone had to be the first. I guess I'm fine with that being Hawaii. You're right. That is some really dirty energy generation right there.
This is, we talk about states' rights, and states' rights seems to be sort of a right-wing thing to defend states passing laws to discriminate against gay people, or states passing laws on guns that supersede federal law. States' rights is often used as a sort of right-wing mantra. I fully support states acting unilaterally with regard to changing up where their energy comes from. In the mainland, in the contiguous 48 United States, you see power grids that cross state lines in a much more significant way. So that can be a little bit more challenging. Nonetheless, there are 31 states right now, plus Washington, D.C., that are doing doing legislation not exactly the same as what Hawaii is doing, but either increasing fees or taxes on dirty energy used for electricity, or subsidizing alternative forms of energy, green forms of energy, renewable energy. 31 different states. So that's a good thing. Of course, when we talk about making plans looking out to 2045, it doesn't necessarily feel like it's happening as fast as we would like, but 31 out of 50 states doing something in the right direction is still pretty good.
Yeah, there's legislation everywhere that is working towards this goal, but of course, nothing this drastic. And who knows if this can even be done in 30 years.
So experts say that it's absolutely possible, but it's going to require action starting immediately.
Yeah. Well, I'd like Hawaii to pave the way here. I guess we'll just have to follow it.
And electricity already particularly expensive in Hawaii, as I mentioned, as a result of the fact that they have to generate it all locally. We have a voicemail number. That number is 219-2-DAVID-P. You can call it any time of day. We talked about Jeb Bush saying that not only would he have voted to invade Iraq, not only would he have made the decision to invade Iraq if he were president, like his brother George W. Bush, Jeb said Hillary would have as well. One of our viewers does not agree with that.
Hey guys, funny how Jeb Bush tried to hide under Hillary Clinton's skirt and fooled you guys on Bush's screw-up in Iraq. Hillary would have never invaded Iraq. She and all the Democrats were in a tough spot, so some voted to give Bush the option of war. At the time, Bush said he just wanted the authority to scare Hussein. And if she voted no, she would have looked weak. She made the mistake of trusting a Republican.
This is a good point, which is just because someone voted to give President Bush the authorization to go to Iraq, the authorization to decide to go to Iraq, doesn't mean that if they were president, they would have actually gone to Iraq. And I think that is a very fair point. Jeb Bush saying he would have gone into Iraq All he knows is that Hillary Clinton voted to authorize President Bush to make that decision. That is very different from saying that Hillary Clinton would have used 9/11 to create a case to go to Iraq. That is a very, very good point, and one that we did not mention when we were talking about that story. Great, great call. On today's bonus show, we will talk about a Bangladeshi blogger, a secular Bangladeshi blogger who was murdered. We will talk about homelessness in Los Angeles rising quickly. Microsoft will stop making some versions of Windows. And Joey Salads' that's a tough word to say, Salads' abduction experiment. All of that and more on today's bonus show, davidpakman.com/membership. The bonus show is fantastic, and you'll also be supporting our show.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.